On 22nd June 1944 at 0030 hours, along a front stretching 100 kilometers from Polotsk to the Pripyat marshes, Soviet artillery units commenced a barrage recorded in Stavka fire mission tables as 2,400 guns. Weather logs noted low cloud, 12 degrees Celsius, light ground mist. German Army Group Center had reported no offensive indicators detected just 48 hours earlier. Staff estimates projected quiet sector status through July. Reality emerged in signal logs. Within 72 hours, 3 Soviet fronts would penetrate German lines to depths exceeding 20 kilometers. Newly declassified fuel allocation sheets show a 3-to-1 logistical priority shift from Ukraine to Belarus between May and June. German radio silence orders, issued too late to reposition reserves, appear in intercepted communications archived at Freiburg. For staff officers on both sides, the barrage became the earliest sign that the front was shifting. The file for that morning closes without comment. The record begins. Soviet Private Pyotr Kashirin, age 22, of the 11th Guards Army, recorded in his diary on the night of 21st June, "We wait. You hear only the lighters of the guns being opened." His unit, positioned near Vitebsk, had arrived by rail on 18th of June after a 6-day journey from reserve positions east of Smolensk. Ration logs show increased allocations on 20th of June, 200 grams of bread per man, 50 grams of sugar, tinned meat. The distribution suggested imminent action. Kashirin wrote that the ground smelled of diesel and wet earth. Trucks moved without lights. Officers walked between positions, checking ammunition loads, saying nothing. Across the line, German Obergefreiter Karl Müller, stationed with the 246th Infantry Division near Orsha, wrote home on 19th of June, "No one thinks they will attack here. We watch the road and wait for bread." His letter, preserved in family archives, described routine: sentry duty, card games, repair of trench boards softened by rain. Supply reports for his sector, filed 15th of June, noted fuel reserves at 38% of minimum mobile requirement. Artillery stocks recorded at 5.1 rounds per gun per day. The division's war diary contains no mention of increased Soviet activity. Müller's letter reached his family in Bavaria on 12th of July. By then, his unit no longer existed as a cohesive formation. The barrage began with a sound Kashirin described as the sky tearing. Soviet fire plans, preserved in military archives, allocated 120,000 rounds for the first 2 hours. Targets included German command posts, supply depots, and communication nodes identified through aerial reconnaissance and partisan reports. Obergefreiter Müller's position took direct hits within the first 15 minutes. A later casualty return, dated 25th of June, lists him as missing. The last entry in Kashirin's diary for that day reads, "We advance at 06 Gur, smoke everywhere, cannot see more than 10 meters. The opening barrage marked the beginning of Operation Bagration, named for a Russian general killed at Borodino in 1812. Soviet planning documents, declassified in the 1990s, show coordination across 4 fronts: 1st Baltic, 3rd Belarusian, 2nd Belarusian, and 1st Belarusian. Total forces committed: 2.3 million personnel, 5,200 tanks and self-propelled guns, 31,000 artillery pieces. German Army Group Center, responsible for defending the sector, fielded approximately 800,000 troops, 900 tanks and assault guns, 9,500 artillery pieces. The imbalance appears clearly in the numbers. German commanders, constrained by Hitler's "hold at all costs" directive, lacked authority to conduct mobile defense or withdraw to prepared positions further west. On 15th of May 1944, at Army Group Center headquarters in Minsk, intelligence summaries compiled by Fremde Heere Ost noted increased Soviet rail traffic east of Vitebsk and Orsha. Between 1st May and 10th June, OKH recorded 22 intercepted Soviet rail movements. Staff assessment marked them as rotational reliefs, not offensive buildup. A Luftwaffe reconnaissance report filed 18 May documented 1,200 rail flat cars unloaded east of Vitebsk. The report received a non-urgent classification. German telephone operator Hilde Kraus, age 17, stationed at a forward signals post near Mogilev, recorded in her diary, "Lines continue to drop. Every message marked urgent, but nothing changes at the map table." Her duty logs, preserved in Bundesarchiv records, show a steady increase in lost connections from 8 May onward. By 15th June, 40% of landline communications in the sector functioned intermittently or not at all. Partisans coordinating with Soviet intelligence had cut cables at documented intervals along supply routes. Soviet General Alexander Vasilevsky, coordinating Stavka planning, filed Directive No. 22-142 on 20th of May, authorizing the shift of 2,952 tanks and self-propelled guns, 31,000 trucks, and 5.3 million artillery shells to the Belarusian axis. Logistics summaries, declassified from Soviet archives, confirm 68% of fuel volume pre-positioned within 40 kilometers of the front by mid-June. Fuel allocation records show delivery of 1,750 rail tank cars between 1st June and 20th June. Each tank car carried approximately 60 metric tons. The scale of movement exceeded any previous Soviet logistics operation on the Eastern Front. Field Marshal Ernst Busch, commanding Army Group Center, requested permission on 10th June to withdraw 4th Army from exposed salients around Vitebsk and Orsha. Hitler refused. Orders issued 12th June designated multiple strongpoints as fortified places to be held regardless of encirclement. German staff officers noted the contradiction. Insufficient mobile reserves to relieve surrounded garrisons, insufficient static forces to hold extended defensive lines. The War Diary of Army Group Center, entry for 18th June, records: frontline commanders report increased enemy patrol activity and artillery registration fire. Assessment: local reconnaissance in force, no indicators of major offensive preparation. The assessment proved catastrophic. Soviet 3rd Tank Army, positioned in reserve near Seno, reported 92% operational readiness on 15th June. Maintenance logs show completion of pre-offensive servicing for 542 tanks and self-propelled guns between 10 and 18 June. Crews conducted live fire exercises at ranges east of the Dnieper. Fuel stock sufficient for 10 days of continuous operations sat in forward depots. Soviet doctrine emphasized deep penetration and rapid exploitation. German defensive plans assumed static defense anchored on fortified towns. The numbers made clear what German staff refused to conclude. The quiet sector no longer existed. Soviet logistical build-up, visible in rail traffic and fuel delivery records, indicated imminent large-scale offensive operations. German fuel shortages, documented at 38% of minimum mobile reserve, precluded effective counterattack or withdrawal to prepared positions. The stage was set. The records confirm what followed was not surprise, but willful misinterpretation of available intelligence. On 10th June 1944, along the Mogilev supply corridor, Soviet railway engineer Tatyana Volkova, age 34, supervised the assembly of a forward fuel depot. Her work log, preserved in Russian State Military Archive, records delivery of 420 tank cars of diesel and aviation fuel between 5 and 15 June. Volkova wrote, "We sleep inside the wagons, coal dust in the teeth, but the trains keep moving." The depot, positioned 12 kilometers behind the planned start line, required construction of 3 kilometers of spur track laid by combat engineer battalions in 6 days. Soviet logistics doctrine prioritized rail transport over road movement. Records show 1,750 locomotives assigned to Belarusian frontage between 1st of May and 20th June. Track capacity calculations, documented in Stavka planning files, allocated 180 supply trains daily to support 4 fronts. Average load per train, 1,200 metric tons. Weather diaries note persistent rain from 5 to 12 June, degrading unpaved roads but leaving rail operations unaffected. Soviet engineers repaired partisan damaged track sections at documented rates of 5 kilometers per day. German Army Group Center faced inverse conditions. Fuel state reports for 12 June show reserves at 38% of minimum mobile requirement. 4th Army Artillery defending the Orsha sector reported 5.1 rounds per gun per day available. Comparison: Soviet artillery supporting 3rd Belorussian Front stockpiled an average of 340 rounds per gun. German horse-drawn transport, comprising 70% of supply vehicles in forward divisions, moved at maximum 15 kilometers per day on degraded roads. German horse team driver Josef Eberhardt, attached to 78th Assault Division near Bobruisk, recorded in a field notebook, "1 shell per 10 minutes. We fire only when we must. Horses take the rest." His unit's war diary, dated 18th of June, notes horse losses exceeded replacement rate by 40% since 1st April. Veterinary logs document malnutrition, exhaustion, and hoof disease. Eberhardt's notation for 20th of June. 6 animals dead this week. No forage arrived since Tuesday. Soviet 11th Guards Army, assigned to the Vitebsk axis, received 2,400 trucks from reserve stocks in early June. Maintenance records show 91% operational readiness on 20th of June. Fuel consumption calculations allocated 200 litres per vehicle per day for the first phase of operations. Forward fuel dumps contained sufficient stocks for 8 days of continuous movement. Soviet planning assumed 70% vehicle availability throughout the operation. Actual rates during the offensive exceeded 85%. The logistical imbalance shaped operational outcomes before the first shot. German defenders, constrained by fuel shortages and limited mobile reserves, could neither concentrate forces for counterattack nor withdraw to shorten defensive lines. Soviet attackers, supported by massive stockpiles, positioned within hours of the front, executed deep penetrations, sustained by continuous supply. Tatyana Volkova's fuel depot delivered 840,000 litres during the first 72 hours of the offensive. Josef Eberhardt's horse team, attempting to evacuate supplies from a threatened depot on 24th of June, was overrun by Soviet armour advancing at 40 kilometers per day. Logistics stopped being preparation. It became the opening blow. The records document not dramatic combat but unglamorous arithmetic. Tons delivered, kilometers moved, rounds available. The side that solved these equations controlled the battlefield. German staff had recognized the principles. They lacked the means to apply them. At 03 hours on 22nd June 1944, the Soviet barrage commenced across the Vitebsk-Orsha axis. Soviet 43rd and 39th Armies attacked German positions around Vitebsk from 3 directions. German 53rd Corps, defending the city, comprised 3 infantry divisions with total strength approximately 35,000 personnel. Soviet infantry attacking strength: 7 rifle divisions, approximately 110,000 troops. Supporting artillery: 1,000 guns. The density equaled 1 gun per 12 meters of front. German Gefreiter Alfred Reimann, serving with 246th Infantry Division, wrote on 23rd of June, "Orders still say hold. The line no longer exists. His unit, positioned in the southern defensive sector, came under continuous artillery fire from 03's hour to 06's hour. Soviet infantry assault began at 06:20. Ryman's company, numbering 120 men on 21st of June, counted 43 effectives by evening of 22nd of June. Medical evacuation records show the company sustained 18 killed, 37 wounded, 22 missing." Ryman's letter, sent from a field hospital on 28th of June, describes the experience. "No time to dig deeper. Shells everywhere. Half the bunkers collapsed before we saw infantry. Soviet 11th Guards Army achieved penetration depths of 14 kilometers in the first 24 hours. Tank brigades, committed through the breach on 23rd of June, advanced an additional 8 kilometers by nightfall. German attempts to seal the penetration failed due to lack of mobile reserves. The single panzer division available, positioned near Orsha, received orders to counterattack toward Vitebsk on 23rd of June. Fuel shortages delayed movement. The division reached the assembly area on 24th June, by which time Soviet forces had encircled Vitebsk completely. Soviet tank mechanic Ivan Zorin, attached to 2nd Guards Tank Corps, logged repairs on 23rd of June. Left track pins replaced with bare hands. Metal burned the skin. His unit advanced 42 kilometers in 36 hours. Maintenance was conducted during brief halts. Zorin's log notes: 6 tanks requiring track repair, 3 needing fuel pump replacement, 1 with transmission damage. All repairs completed within 8 hours. The Corps resumed advance at 06 Auvergne on 24th June. German 53rd Corps received orders on 24th June to hold Vitebsk as a fortified place. The encirclement closed that afternoon. Soviet forces cut all 5 supply roads. Luftwaffe attempts to resupply the garrison by air delivered approximately 30 tons of ammunition and medical supplies over the next 3 days. Estimated requirement: 120 tons per day. German casualty reports compiled after the battle record 10,277 personnel killed or captured in the Vitebsk pocket between 22 and 27 June. Temperature records for the period show 16 to 21 degrees Celsius, ground dry. Conditions favoured armoured manoeuvre. Soviet doctrine emphasized exploitation of breakthroughs before German reserves could arrive. The speed of advance reflected pre-positioned logistics. Fuel, ammunition, and supplies moved forward on schedule. German defensive doctrine, anchored on static strongpoints, proved inadequate against mobile warfare conducted at this scale. The attack no longer required permission to succeed. It required only fuel to continue. Soviet after-action reports note the 11th Guards Army advanced 110 kilometers between 22nd June and 30th June. German defensive positions, bypassed rather than reduced, became isolated pockets eliminated by follow-on forces. Alfred Ryman survived. His division did not. War diaries record the 246th Infantry Division destroyed in combat, losses exceeding 75%. Reconstitution began in August, with replacement personnel drawn from training depots in Germany. The new formation bore the same number, nothing else remained. On 28 June 1944, Soviet forces completed encirclement of German Fourth Army near Minsk. The pocket contained approximately 105,000 troops organized into 12 divisions. Hitler, monitoring operations from his headquarters at Rastenburg, received withdrawal requests from Field Marshal Busch at 1437. Radio log preserved in OKH archives records Hitler's response: "The pocket will be held. Relief is being organized." No relief forces existed. Available German reserves were committed to containing Soviet breakthroughs north and south of the encirclement. German Fourth Army possessed sufficient ammunition for approximately 4 days of sustained combat. Fuel reserves permitted limited movement of motorized units. Medical supplies sufficient for 3,000 casualties. Actual casualties exceeded 8,000 in the first 48 hours of encirclement. Luftwaffe attempted aerial resupply. 182 sorties flown between 28 and 30 June. 54 supply containers successfully delivered. Total supplies delivered, approximately 18 tons. Estimated daily requirement, 300 tons. Field Marshal Busch was removed from command at 23:30 on 28th of June. His adjutant's diary note preserved in Bundesarchiv records. He asked if there was still a road out. No one answered. Field Marshal Walter Model assumed command of Army Group Center on 29th of June with orders to stabilize the front. Model's initial assessment, sent to OKH on 30th of June, reported, Army Group Center has ceased to exist as a coherent defensive force. Remaining combat effective units total approximately 30% of pre-offensive strength. Inside the pocket, German units attempted breakout attempts on 29 and 30 of June. Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army blocked western escape routes. Artillery fire from 3 sides prevented concentration of forces. German casualty records document approximately 65,000 killed or missing, 40,000 captured by 5th of July. Prisoners included 2 corps commanders, 5 divisional commanders, and 87 battalion commanders. Soviet losses during the encirclement phase, approximately 24,000 killed and wounded. Soviet medic Nina Petrenko, serving with a frontline aid station near the Minsk pocket, wrote on 30th of June, "Flies on the bandages before the blood cooled." Her medical company treated 340 wounded in 72 hours. Morphine supplies exhausted by second day. Petrenko's log notes, amputation of 16 limbs without anesthetic, performed by 2 surgeons working in shifts. Water supply contaminated. Dysentery cases among medical personnel, 40%. The collapse at Minsk demonstrated the failure of Hitler's fortified place doctrine. German formations ordered to hold fixed positions without mobile reserves or adequate supplies could not prevent encirclement. Soviet operational planning, which emphasized deep penetration and rapid encirclement, exploited this rigidity. The numbers tell the story. 105,000 troops surrounded, 65,000 casualties, 12 divisions destroyed. The time frame, 6 days from breakthrough to encirclement, 12 days to pocket elimination. Command failure moved from abstraction to body count. German staff officers had recognized the danger of static defense on an extended front. They lacked authority to implement mobile defense. Soviet commanders, executing pre-planned operations supported by massive logistics, achieved objectives on schedule. The Wehrmacht's institutional structure, which centralized decision-making at the highest level while denying initiative to field commanders, proved catastrophic when facing an enemy capable of rapid operational maneuver. The Minsk pocket eliminated 1/4 of Army Group Center's pre-offensive strength. Remaining German forces, stretched across a front now penetrated at multiple points, could not establish a continuous defensive line. Soviet exploitation forces advanced westward at rates exceeding 30 kilometers per day. German attempts to form new defensive positions collapsed as Soviet armor arrived before German infantry could dig in. The cascade had begun. Each defensive failure accelerated the next. The front did not retreat in orderly fashion, it disintegrated. On 1st of July 1944, Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army began exploitation operations toward the Berezina River. The army comprised 542 tanks and self-propelled guns, 380 armoured personnel carriers, and 4,200 trucks. Fuel consumption records show average 500 litres per armoured vehicle per day. Forward fuel dumps, established during the breakthrough phase, maintained supply despite rapid advance. Soviet advance rates between 1 and 4th of July averaged 110 kilometers. The army crossed the Berezina on 3rd July after German demolition teams destroyed 11 of 13 bridges. Combat engineers constructed pontoon crossings under fire. Crossing time for one tank brigade, 4 hours. German attempts to defend the river line failed due to insufficient forces and lack of coordination between retreating units. German retreat columns, extending up to 32 kilometers along congested roads, became targets for Soviet Il-2 ground attack aircraft. Soviet mission orders 742 through 751, filed between 2 and 5th of July, document 420 ground attack sorties against German columns. Estimated casualties: 4,000 personnel, 150 vehicles destroyed, 40 artillery pieces abandoned. Weather reports note clear skies, visibility 10 kilometers, conditions favorable for air operations. German 31st Infantry Division, attempting withdrawal from positions near Bobruisk, lost 72% of personnel strength between 1 and 5th of July. OKH casualty return dated 5th of July records 6,400 killed, wounded, or missing from an initial strength of 8,900. The division's war diary ends on 4th of July. No subsequent entries exist. Survivors were absorbed into other units or taken prisoner. Lieutenant Heinz Matthes, serving with the division's reconnaissance battalion, wrote on 3rd July, "We march until the boots come apart. No maps, only smoke columns." His letter, recovered from his body in August 1944, describes the retreat. "No food since yesterday, water from ditches. Officers don't know where we are supposed to go. Men drop from exhaustion. We leave them." Soviet logistics maintained the advance despite extended supply lines. Truck convoys operated 24 hours, headlights permitted after dark as German air. Opposition had virtually ceased. Fuel delivery logs show 2.4 million litres delivered to forward depots between 1 and 5 July. Ammunition expenditure: 180,000 artillery rounds. Soviet losses during this phase: approximately 12,000 killed and wounded, 140 tanks destroyed or damaged. German attempts to establish a new defensive line along the Niemen River failed due to lack of bridging equipment. Combat engineer units, depleted during the retreat, could not construct fortifications before Soviet forces arrived. OKH Engineering, log number 177, dated 6th July, reports, "Bridging assets insufficient for planned defense line. Recommend immediate withdrawal to prepared positions west of Vilnius." The recommendation was denied. Mobility had become a weapon only one side could afford. German forces, moving on foot or by horse-drawn transport, covered 10 to 15 kilometers per day while under constant air attack. Soviet mechanized forces, supplied by continuous truck convoys, advanced 3 to 4 times faster. The gap widened daily. German units that stopped to establish defensive positions were bypassed and encircled. Units that continued retreating dissolved as personnel dispersed or surrendered. The race to the Berezina demonstrated the operational advantage conferred by mechanized logistics. Soviet tank armies, designed for deep operations, functioned as intended. German infantry armies, structured for positional warfare, collapsed when forced into mobile operations without adequate transport or fuel. The asymmetry appears in the casualty figures. Soviet forces suffered approximately 1 casualty per 6 kilometers of advance. German forces suffered 1 casualty per every 14 personnel in the retreat zone. The Mathematics of Disintegration. Lieutenant Mathis's body was identified through his paybook in August. He died of wounds near Vilnius on 12th of July. His letter reached his family in October 1944. By then, Soviet forces had advanced 600 kilometers from their starting positions. Army Group Center no longer appeared on German situation maps as a cohesive formation. On 5th of July 1944, Soviet forces entered Minsk. The city, captured by German forces in June 1941, had served as Army Group Center headquarters until evacuated on 2nd July. Soviet rifle divisions secured the city center by midday. Reconnaissance photographs show extensive destruction, 70% of buildings damaged or destroyed, all bridges over the Svislok River demolished, rail yards cratered by demolitions. German forces continued retreating westward. Between 5 and 8th of July, Soviet forces took 57,000 prisoners. Prisoner processing records compiled by NKVD units document 242 officers above rank of major, including 2 corps commanders and 9 division commanders. Interrogation reports note prisoners suffered from exhaustion, malnutrition, and untreated wounds. Medical examinations conducted at transit camps recorded average weight loss of 8 kilograms per prisoner. Oberst Hans Hahner, commanding officer of the 389th Infantry Division, was captured on 7th of July near Molodechno. His POW card file, preserved in Russian archives, lists date of birth, rank, and wounds, shell fragment in left shoulder, untreated since 4th of July. Hahn later wrote, "No battle, only ending. Orders meant nothing. The men could not continue." He survived captivity. Returned to Germany in 1949, Soviet operational summaries for the first 2 weeks of Bagration. Document 28, German divisions destroyed, 9 divisions rendered combat ineffective. Destroyed meant losses exceeding 75%. Combat ineffective meant losses between 50 and 75%. Total German casualties through 8th of July, approximately 200,000 killed, wounded, or missing. Soviet losses during the same period, approximately 90,000 killed and wounded. The rate of Soviet advance accelerated as German defensive cohesion collapsed. Records show Soviet forces liberated 2,000 square kilometers per day during the first week of July. German attempts to establish defensive positions along the Niemen River failed within 24 hours. OKH Engineering, log number 177, dated 6th of July, reported bridging equipment insufficient to support planned defense line. The recommendation to withdraw to prepared positions near Vilnius was rejected. Soviet 5th Guards tank army reached the Niemen on 8th of July, having advanced 230 kilometers in 15 days. Maintenance logs document 420 tanks operational out of initial 542, a readiness rate of 77%. Fuel consumption exceeded projections by 12% due to sustained high-speed movement. Forward logistics units delivered sufficient supplies to maintain operations without pause. Soviet doctrine emphasized exploitation during enemy disorganization. The advance continued. German defensive doctrine assumed availability of mobile reserves to counterattack penetrations. Army Group Center possessed no reserves. Units retreating from encircled positions arrived at rear areas disorganized and under strength. Attempts to form ad hoc battle groups failed due to lack of heavy weapons, transport and communications equipment. Staff officers compiled casualty lists. The lists grew faster than replacement personnel arrived. The front no longer retreated in an organized manner. It ceased to exist as a continuous line. Soviet forces identified gaps and advanced through them. German units withdrew independently, attempting to reach successive river lines. Coordination between formations broke down. Radio communications, disrupted by equipment losses and operator casualties, functioned intermittently. Written orders arrived after the situations they addressed had changed. Prisoner interrogations provided Soviet intelligence with detailed information on German dispositions and intentions. Captured documents, including unit war diaries and situation maps, confirmed German defensive preparations remained incomplete. Oberst Hahner, questioned on 9th of July, provided organizational details on Army Group Center's remaining units. His interrogation report, 16 pages, catalogued unit strengths, equipment status, and morale conditions. The information confirmed Soviet operational assessments. German resistance would continue, but cohesive defense was no longer possible. The capture of Minsk marked the operational climax of Bagration's first phase. Soviet forces had penetrated 200 kilometers, destroyed or shattered 37 German divisions, and severed Army Group Center's communications with adjacent army groups. The offensive would continue for 6 more weeks. The outcome, however, was decided in the first 2 weeks. The German front line on 22nd June stretched from Vitebsk to Bobruisk. By 8th July, that line existed only in memory. The maps showed Soviet forces advancing on Vilnius, Grodno, and Brest. Behind them, destroyed equipment, hastily dug graves, columns of prisoners marching east. On 15th of July 1944, in the OKW map room at Rastenburg, staff officers compiled casualty returns and unit status reports from the Eastern Front. The figures documented catastrophe. Army Group Center had lost 28 divisions destroyed and 9 divisions rendered combat ineffective. Total personnel losses through 12th of July, approximately 300,000 killed, wounded, or missing. Equipment losses included 2,000 tanks and assault guns, 10,000 artillery pieces, 57,000 vehicles. Hitler ordered formation of a new command structure to replace Army Group Center. Orders issued 15th of July designated existing Army Group North Ukraine to absorb surviving formations and defend a line from Kaunas to Brest-Litovsk. Personnel allocations for the reorganized command showed 38% of required manpower available. Projections for bringing units to establishment strength assumed 8 weeks. Soviet forces were advancing at 30 kilometers per day. British ultra-analysts at Bletchley Park, monitoring German communications, noted the shift in signal traffic patterns. A report dated 17th of July observed, German signals now show no reserve language, only fragmentation. Previous intercepts referenced battalion movements and divisional boundaries. Current intercepts describe ad hoc groups with improvised designations. The assessment concluded German defensive capabilities on the Eastern Front had deteriorated to extent that sustained operations without major reinforcement were impossible. Those reinforcements could not be provided. Wehrmacht deployment tables for July 1944 show 70 divisions committed to defense against Western Allied invasion in France. 25 divisions occupied Italy. 18 divisions remained in Scandinavia, 20 in the Balkans. The strategic reserve available for transfer to the Eastern Front totaled 4 divisions. Pre-war German doctrine assumed availability of a strategic reserve equal to 20% of total forces. Actual reserve in July 1944, less than 3%. Soviet industrial production provided contrast. Summary reports from Soviet industrial commissariats document completion of 26 rifle divisions worth of equipment between 1 and 14 July. The equipment came from stockpiles captured in forward depots abandoned by German forces during the retreat. Soviet logistics units catalogued 4,200 trucks, 850 artillery pieces, 12,000 rifles, and 2.4 million rounds of small arms ammunition recovered from German supply dumps. The captured material compatible with Soviet weapons where applicable, was immediately redistributed to advancing units. Western Allied intelligence noted the impact on German dispositions in France. Deployment tables showed German reinforcement rate to Normandy declining from 3 divisions per month in May and June to 0.6 divisions per month in July and August. Units transferred to France came from less threatened sectors in Scandinavia and the Balkans, not from strategic reserve. The transfer rate was insufficient to replace combat losses in Normandy, let alone reinforce the Eastern Front. German staff clerk Anna writes, working in the OKW operations section, recorded in her diary on 18th of July. We paste new unit blocks on the map. The wall grows empty. Yesterday we removed 23 division markers from the central sector. Today we added 6. The mathematics speak clearly. Wrights survived the war. Her diary, donated to the Bundesarchiv in 1982, provides rare first-hand documentation of staff-level awareness of the military situation. Strategic consequences extended beyond immediate operational losses. Germany's military production, already strained by Allied bombing and resource shortages, could not replace losses at rates approaching Soviet production capacity. German tank production in July 1944, approximately 1,200 vehicles. Soviet tank production, same period, approximately 2,400 vehicles. The disparity existed across all categories: artillery, trucks, small arms, ammunition. Germany's economic base, even with occupied territories, could not match combined Soviet and Western Allied production. The impossibility became mathematical. Soviet forces had demonstrated ability to conduct large-scale offensive operations supported by industrial production that exceeded German capacity to replace losses. Western Allied forces, having established lodgment in France, would continue advancing as German forces lacked reserves to contain breakthroughs. German strategic position required simultaneous defense against offensives on 3 fronts: Eastern, Western, and Southern, with industrial capacity sufficient to support sustained operations on perhaps 1. Operation Bagration proved that collapse is not a battle. It is an accounting line that can no longer be balanced. German staff officers understood the mathematics. They lacked authority to adjust strategy accordingly. Hitler's directives continued to emphasize holding territory regardless of cost. The cost accumulated in casualty returns, equipment losses, and prisoner rolls. By mid-July, the sum exceeded what remained. The wall grew empty. New blocks could not fill the space. The front would continue westward, propelled by arithmetic that no longer permitted any other outcome. On 19th August 1944, Soviet forward command posts reached the outskirts of Warsaw. The advance from the Belarusian starting positions had covered approximately 600 kilometers in 8 weeks. Soviet operational summaries, compiled that week, documented total German casualties in Operation Bagration: 400,000 killed, wounded, or captured. Soviet losses: 180,000 killed and wounded. The casualty ratio reflected the asymmetry of the operation. Attackers with comprehensive logistics, mobility, and air support facing defenders without reserves, fuel, or coordination. German armoured strength on the Eastern Front, measured in available tanks and assault guns, declined by 41% between 23rd June and 19th August. AFV Abteilung report dated August 1944 documented 1,800 armoured vehicles lost in Bagration, of which approximately 800 were destroyed in combat, 600 abandoned due to mechanical failure or fuel shortage, and 400 captured intact. Soviet recovery units catalogued captured vehicles. 210 were refurbished and returned to service with Red Army units. The remainder were scrapped for spare parts. Private Pyotr Kasherin, introduced in the opening chapter, survived the offensive. His service record shows participation in liberation of Minsk, Vilnius, and Bialystok. He was wounded on 2nd August near Brest-Litovsk, shell fragment in right leg, treated at field hospital, returned to unit 15th August. Kasharin's war ended in January 1945 when his unit reached the Vistula River. Medical discharge followed in March 1945 due to complications from his wound. He returned home weighing 52 kilograms, 22 kilograms below his pre-war weight. German casualties included soldiers whose names appear in preserved records. Franz Keller, mechanic with the 18th Panzer Division, age 19, was killed on 28 June near Bobruisk. His personal effects inventory, preserved in Bundesarchiv records, lists 1 watch, 1 spoon, 1 letter from mother dated 15th June. The letter, never read, was returned to his family in December 1944. It asked whether he had received the package she sent in May. He had not. The operational depth achieved by Soviet forces, 600 kilometers in 8 weeks, exceeded any previous offensive operation by either side on the Eastern Front. German defensive planning had assumed Soviet advances would culminate after 100 to 150 kilometers due to logistics constraints. Soviet logistics performance invalidated that assumption. Fuel delivery records show consistent supply maintained through rapid advance. Ammunition expenditure remained within projected parameters. Truck maintenance conducted by forward repair units kept vehicle availability above 75% throughout the operation. The success derived from integration of planning, logistics, and execution. Soviet staff officers trained in deep operations theory developed in the 1930s applied doctrine at operational scale. Logistics officers pre-positioned supplies based on advance rate projections. Combat units executed maneuvers according to plan, adjusted when necessary based on reconnaissance and prisoner interrogations. The system functioned. The results validated the method. German military doctrine, developed for mobile warfare conducted by mechanized forces, could not be executed by infantry armies lacking transport and fuel. Staff planning remained competent. Execution became impossible when resources required for mobile defense were unavailable. The institutional structure, which centralized authority while distributing responsibility, paralyzed response to operational crises. Field commanders identified necessary actions. Higher headquarters prohibited those actions. The delays accumulated. Opportunities closed. Encirclements formed. For historians, Operation Bagration demonstrated that a front does not fall when it is defeated in battle. It falls when every document begins to describe the same truth. Nothing remains to send forward. German situation reports from late July describe units reduced to 20% strength, artillery batteries without ammunition, transport columns without fuel. Requests for reinforcements specify required personnel and equipment. Responses note no reinforcements available. The exchange continues. The situation deteriorates. The human cost appears in medical records, prisoner files, and cemetery registers. Soviet military casualties, 180,000 killed and wounded, represent approximately 8% of forces committed. German military casualties, 400,000 toilets, represent 50% of initial strength. The disparity reflects operational success. Soviet forces advanced continuously, minimizing exposure to defensive fire. German forces retreated continuously, maximizing exposure to artillery and air attack. The strategic impact extended beyond the Eastern Front. German forces in France, facing Allied breakout from Normandy, received no reinforcements from the east. Units in Italy remained in position. Scandinavia and the Balkans contributed limited forces. the Wehrmacht, structured to fight a war of movement with mechanized formations supported by mobile logistics, instead fought positional defense with infantry armies lacking transport. The institutional capacity no longer matched the strategic requirement. Pyotr Kashirin returned to his village in 1946. He worked as a school teacher until retirement in 1978. His diary, donated to a regional museum in 1990, provided source material for this account. Franz Keller has no grave. His name appears on a memorial in his hometown commemorating local casualties. His mother's letter, preserved in family papers, ends, "Be safe. Come home soon." The hope proved unfounded. The record shows only what remained. One watch, one spoon, one letter, one name among 400,000. The file for Operation Bagration closes with casualty summaries and equipment inventories. The numbers require no interpretation. The balance had turned.